early slate my ass. I want you guys to hear that. Do no early slate.
I will walk out on the show.
You may think I have no self-respect when you watch these streams, but when it comes to talking about an early slate with these two games, I have some. Yep, let's do it. What is up, guys? You got yourselves an MLB strategy show that is exclusively for the main slate. I will not talk 1 second of early slate. No, we will give you guys a little bit of a look there, though Greg and I are not playing that one. Not going to talk in much depth, but we'll give you guys some ownership to talk about that if you heard me on the hot mic. I am Chris Spags, hanging out once again with my pal and yours, nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, just a couple of early slate enthusiasts here. I will spit on my camera and leave the room when you ask me about it. But yeah, so the early slate. I mean, sure, if people really want us to talk about it, we could hit it a little bit at the end. But I'm not playing it. Spags isn't playing it. It's a terrible 2-game slate, and I personally don't have interest. If people want to ask us questions about it, so be it. We'll hit it at the end, and I'll pretend to not be upset.
Yeah, it is an ugly one with Arizona, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. And I guess we'll give you guys a 30-second elevator pitch about that slate coming up in a second. But if you want to know about every slate, here's the thing. You don't even need to rely on us as hosts. Obviously, Greg and I, everybody else we have doing shows around here, Terry, Alex, Max, Gundacker, all these guys doing content for us here on the channel. We're going to give you the best information that we can, but we can't talk about all the data that is available at Awesemo because that's just how it is for you guys. You got to do the research on yourself using all the tools that we have at awesemo.com/join. And you can get all the great Awesemo tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. It includes full access to all the premium content and tools, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, the lineup builder, the boom bust tool, the top stacks tool, and top pitchers tool for MLB. Lots of great stuff. So go to awesemo.com/join. And added bonus here, if you're an MMA fan, we got Usman versus Masvidal coming up this weekend, a big rematch, UFC 261. If you use the promo code UFC 261 at awesemo.com/join, you get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus MMA. All the tools on there, including the top fighters tool, which is a lot like the top stacks tool, but for fighters, as you may have guessed by that one. And it's only $14.98 for 30 days of Awesemo Plus MMA. You're going to get 2 big cards if you sign up now. So go to awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code UFC 261 to get half off of your first month of Awesemo Plus MMA. And also make sure to check out OddsShopper as well, oddshopper.awesemo.com for the best of live lines, prop bets, futures, everything you want to get. And also a lot of bets on there have the win percentage and ROI percentage tools, so you can find out how much you stand to make according to projections straight from Alex Awesemo Baker. So go to oddshopper.awesemo.com for all of your sports betting needs. And Greg, you don't care about the early slate, so let me just slate this real fast with the early slate information that we have. And the ownership on the early slate on DraftKings, and this is for you guys out there who are diehards dying to play this one. A lot of ownership going to Jeff Hoffman, Mitch Keller, Taylor Widener. So all the pitchers going to be highly owned on DraftKings. No surprises there. Jose Ramirez, undervalued, it would seem, on the early slate. Eugenio Suarez, also a chalk play. So the Cincinnati stack going to be well owned today, it looks like. But I guess that's... Any of those names mean anything to you, Greg? Like Mitch Keller, we've talked about before. Real dog shit pitching slate for this early slate people out there.
Yeah, somebody in the YouTube chat, let me give credit where it's due. So Tony A asked, can you give me some good low-owned plays on the early slate? I mean, well, we're talking about like there is none. It's a 2-game slate. The pitchers are 63% owned, 56% owned, 55% owned, and Jose Urania 26% owned. So there, if you want to go the contrarian pitcher, you've Urania at 26%. But I mean, that's not. I guess if you want to go really crazy, try to find a relief pitcher that you might think maybe scores 0 fantasy points, and maybe all the other pitchers score negative. Let's see, what would be a reasonable way to be contrarian on this slate?
Pittsburgh looks underowned as a top stack.
I would say stacking Arizona, just because. Either stacking Arizona or Detroit, just because Mitch Keller and Jeff Hoffman are picking up so much ownership. But it's a 2-game slate. Basically, all 4 of the pitchers have about the same ownership, and then all the hitters that are expected to start are popular, right? There's no hitters that are looking like they're going to be in the starting lineup that are below 17% ownership or 16% ownership. And then most of the starting hitters are like 30 to 40% ownership. So I don't like, I hate to say that because I know that people want to have, good information for a 2-game slate, but the ownership's pretty flat across the board. Like I don't think there's one low owned play that sticks out because everybody that's expected to start has high ownership.
Yeah, Detroit looks to me to be the most under-owned according to the top stacks tool. 23% chance of being a top stack on DraftKings, 19% ownership. So you could go there. It is, as Teddy is mentioning in the YouTube chat, apparently very cold in Detroit. So cold bats don't often awaken too well, but going against, I guess, that matchup for really either side, certainly some ways to get there. But Mitch Keller, about as volatile as you'll find. So based on the ownership, again, this is not us vouching for it. We're not playing the slate, but this is just what we're seeing to give you guys something here. And of course, get all the tools for yourself at awesemo.com/join. So you don't have to need us to have an interest in an early slate for you guys to get content on it. Well, let's get into the main slate here, Greg. We got ourselves a 5-gamer coming up later today. We also have a live before lock show coming up in just a few hours at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah, 3 p.m. Eastern time with Alex, Terry, and the aforementioned Gundacker on this, not on the same stream here, but it's going to be on a different stream. But make sure to check it out. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you'll know when those guys go live. And Greg, I'll ask you the question I always do to lead in here. Any overarching thoughts on this slate? Anything that jumped out from either your crunches or what you've observed so far?
My early crunch is a lot of exposure to Joey Lucchesi, which is something I don't really feel great about. So that's something I'm going to have to dig into a little bit more. But yeah, the pitching options don't look great. We've got Walker Buehler as a pretty clear SP1, but he's a fairly tough matchup against the Padres. And I mean, beyond him, it's hard to feel really confident in the pitching. So it looks like that the late slate is actually going to be a really good spot to try to find leverage, because if there's going to be some crappy pitchers that are, like 40, 35% owned, that's kind of the type of thing that I like on a smallish MLB slate. Really high variance, and it seems like a slate I'm either going to do very well or very poorly on.
That's the nature of DFS, of course. So hit that like button, guys. Show us a little love here because we're going to get going here on this main slate of games. A 5-gamer. And the first game up is Seattle going against Boston. 4.1 implied runs for Seattle against Nick Pivetta. Boston 5.4 runs against Justin Dunn. And this spot for Seattle against Pivetta. Pivetta's been hit pretty hard over the last couple seasons since 2019 at 235 ISO. Has had an okay strikeout rate of 21.5% K rate, but also given up a 4.5% on run rate. League average, we talk about a lot in these shows, just shy of 3%. So above average there for Pivetta. And a lot of ownership going to Pivetta here. And granted, he is facing Seattle. He's got 6 guys that strike out above league average in their projected lineup. So let's talk about Pivetta's side here, Greg, where I think, to me, just knowing what I know of Nick Pivetta over time, I know Nick Pivetta's had a couple decent games here, has been a little bit luckier in terms of the power numbers being down, but I see nothing that he's changed where I think he's a good pitcher now. And if 40% of the field are going to be on a guy on DraftKings, I get the price point, I get all that stuff, I would want some Seattle stacks right away, even though they do look a little bit overowned according to the top stacks tool.
Yeah, I'm conflicted here because generally when a pitcher is this popular, we would have to assume that the stack is not that popular, but not the case. The Mariners are actually the most negatively leveraged team in our top stacks tool. That's what you said right there. They're picking up a 13% ownership share, so they're very, very popular. And then only 10% odds of being the top scoring team on the slate. So I kind of look at that, and then I look at our top pitchers tool where we do have Pivetta projected for 43% ownership. And I feel like the best way to actually, like, I'm going to have some exposure to Seattle. I'm going to have some exposure to Nick Pivetta. I think I'm actually going to be underweight to both sides, though. And I'm just going to kind of hope it's going to be a thing where nobody really goes off and has a big day. I think there's other pitchers that I'm going to try to get to for less ownership than Pivetta. And then there's other offenses I'm going to try to stack for less ownership. I'm going to be underweight to the field on both sides just because everything looks like it's going over-owned, right? So if something changes later in the day to where, let's say, Pivetta's ownership goes up and Seattle's ownership goes down, then I think that there would be good leverage to be had in Seattle. Or maybe the inverse happens. Maybe Seattle becomes really popular and Pivetta's ownership starts to drop. But as it looks right now, with ownership being really popular on both sides, like Seattle isn't a good offense, Pivetta isn't a good pitcher. So I don't think that the ownership really weighs out the proper upside here.
Yeah, I think that seems fair to me. Just definitely chalky ownership for Pavetta. It seems just jarring to see at this point of the day. And sometimes those things do move around, of course, throughout the course of the day. So make sure you are part of the Awesemo Plus memberships and getting some of that ownership projections throughout the day here. And I'm sure they'll talk about it more in Live Before Lock coming up later. I mentioned, again, 3 p.m. Eastern, so tune into that coming up. But yeah, Pavetta, just not the most impressive pitcher. He's going to be highly owned, I think, is a function of the slate, perhaps the pricing, opening up some stacks people like. But it does seem like he looks overowned. The stack looks overowned. And I guess the question for me that I would have before we talk a little bit more about the stack, Greg, would be Nick Pavetta's ownership. If he's going to be 43%, is there a number you feel like you'll get to as a max exposure for yourself in Fantasy Cruncher?
Let's see. So Nick Pavetta at 7,400, 43%. It's looking at our top pitcher tool here. It seems like based on how I usually work my lineups, I probably have Pavetta somewhere in the 30% range. Just because right now we have him with still, I mean, he still has 29% chance of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. So it'd be something I have about 75% ownership to the field, at least based on how I'm looking at it initially. And on the Seattle side, I'd probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 or 6% stacks of them. So I would be definitely higher on the Pavetta side while being underweight to both ends of the game.
All right, let's talk about the Seattle stack here, because if you are going to play Seattle, I think you got to cue in on a few bats here that you would like to get to. And I think Taylor Trammell's one that jumps out to me. Not the biggest sample size for him. He's still a young hitter, only 36 at-bats versus a righty in the majors so far, but has had some nice power numbers. I think he is one of few guys in Seattle who's shown a decent pop in his lineup, besides, I guess, Mitch Haniger, who's going to be in the leadoff spot. But are there any Seattle hitters who jump out meaningfully? I just think Trammell, to me, just trying to ride whatever start he's had. We've seen it in the past. Guys like Austin Riley jump to mind for me, where I guess Keston Hiura too. Just guys sometimes getting that little swing here, get that flow going, and they have some power numbers that maybe fall off a cliff at some point. But Taylor Trammell's shown enough that I would be there. But the more reliable bats, Haniger, I think, jumps out. Kyle Lewis, not a terrible play, a 214 ISO for him, 133 WRC plus. Does anybody stand out meaningfully for you here on a Seattle team that mostly stinks but has good price points, and maybe somebody gets something done?
So Kyle Seager is only 3,100 on Fanduel, but he's 4,700 on DraftKings. So as a site-specific play, I think Kyle Seager looks a little bit underpriced on Fanduel while he's overpriced on DraftKings. An injury note here also is that Ty France has not played in a few games because he got hit by pitch on the arm, and he's been out, except it looks like there's a chance that he is going to return. So as a middle infield option, Ty France would be somebody on DraftKings that I would have interest in having exposure to. But overall, I think the top plays here are, to your point, Kyle Lewis and Mitch Haniger. It's odd that Kyle Seager is so much more expensive than everybody else on DraftKings. So that's going to make him a little bit harder to fit in. But yeah, Haniger, Kyle Lewis, 4,100 for Haniger on DK. Kyle Lewis, 3,100. He was one of the better hitting rookies in baseball last year. So that's a very favorable price point.
Yeah, and Mitch Haniger actually been hitting the ball well over the last season and change too. 260 ISO overall, 154 WRC plus. Going back to 2019, the numbers not quite as impressive, but as I mentioned, a 245 ISO against righties. He's in the leadoff spot, or projected to be in the leadoff spot, is Mitch Haniger. So definitely the most obvious guy, I think, here, but also going to be owned by about a quarter of the field on DraftKings, because it is going to be one of those kinds of slates. And also one thing I do like to touch on here, normally here, no splits really for Pavetta that stand out as being notably worse. Gives up a 4.6% home run rate to lefties, 4.4% to righties. The xFIP is worse for lefties, a 5.7 xFIP compared to 5.0 versus righties. But point being, Pavetta's been mostly bad against both sides of the plate. So really take whoever you want if you want to stack up the Seattle team. Let's talk about the Boston side. Justin Dunn going against them. Justin Dunn at a cheap price point, but not projected to go very deep in this game. Pretty low projection from Awesemo overall. Dunn has been really bad versus lefties in a somewhat limited sample size, faced 150 lefties, giving up a 1.8 whip, 7.8 xFIP, and a 243 ISO. Also, a lot of stolen base upside against Justin Dunn, even though he's not going to go deep into games. So maybe give your speedier players a little bit of a bump up. But how are you feeling about Justin Dunn here, Greg? I presume just not a guy you'd play any of today, right?
If he's going to pick up zero, I mean, he's projected for 0.2% ownership right now on DraftKings, I think was the number. Let me see. What was the Justin? 1.7% ownership. So he did pitch 5 innings in his last game. I'm just pulling up his pitch count really quick because given how sad the state is of starting pitchers on this slate, he did throw 93 pitches 2 starts ago. I don't know, a 1% owned guy at 6,800. Like, is Nick Pivetta 40 times more likely to end up in the optimal lineup than Justin Dunn? I'm going to say probably not the case. So on a slate that's so small, it's really hard for me to take players out of their player pool, out of my player pool. So yeah, I'm fine with being overweight to Justin Dunn when he's only being 1% owned by the field. Not saying that I want him in like 20% of my lineups, but if I get to like 5 to 10% of Justin Dunn, if the ownership stays at 1%, I'm gonna be pretty happy with that, because like Nick Pivetta, like I said, he's 43% owned. Is Justin Dunn good? No, but neither is Nick Pivetta. So I mean, anywhere I could get some sort of pivot play here, and I think for the ownership, Justin Dunn makes sense there.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair way to look at it. And it is only, as Greg mentioned, about 1.5% ownership projected on DK. And the one thing that jumps out to me with Dunn is that he's been not good with a 19% strikeout rate, a little bit above that since 2019. And also just getting lucky with his BABIP, a 160 BABIP over that time period as well. So a guy who has not looked good, but also been lucky is usually a guy that I do like to target against. So I wouldn't have a ton of interest in Justin Dunn, but he is one way to get different on a somewhat short slate. So I get what Greg's going here, and he is one of the value pitchers out there you can go to, but it's only pitched about 4 innings, a little bit less than that per start. So you're not expecting him to go too deep, and you probably just need one of those days where all the other pitchers blow up. I guess we talked enough about Dunn. The Boston stack, though, looks like they are one that's going to be a bit under-owned, Greg, according to the top stacks tool. 14% chance of being a top stack, 13% ownership expected for him. And you have a lot of guys here that you can point, I think, pretty obviously. They're splits. Rafael Devers is mashed righties over a good course of time now at 283 ISO, 147 WRC plus. He is priced incredibly highly, though, as is JD Martinez, as is Xander Bogaerts. So really the main hitters here for Boston are incredibly pricey, and you are paying up a pretty good margin to get there. How are you feeling about these guys, accounting for the fact, too, that Steven mentioned in the chat, it is going to be a cold day in the New England area. Looks like about 40 degrees.
Wildly different team on DraftKings and Fanduel. So on DraftKings, like you said, they're going a little bit under-owned, and this is one of my favorite teams to stack up on DraftKings. On Fanduel, they have, the same 15% chance being or a little bit higher, 14.9% chance being the top scoring team for Fanduel, so a little bit higher than what they have on DK. But they have a 21% ownership share on Fanduel. So they are the most negatively leveraged team by a very wide margin on Fanduel. Whereas on DraftKings, they're actually going under-owned. And a lot of that is because of the pricing. The Red Sox are really expensive on DraftKings, so people are a little hesitant to stack them up. But we just went over the pitching options. There's enough salary that we're not going to be spending it all on pitching anyway, right? It's not like the opportunity cost isn't that we aren't getting Jacob deGrom or Corbin Burns or something like that in our lineups. Like we're talking about paying, like Nick Pivetta is like a somewhat of a pay. Like Nick Pivetta is somebody who people are rostering at a high clip this slate. The pitching options are terrible. So I don't mind that I'm paying up for an offense here. So on DraftKings, Boston's a high priority. On FanDuel, way overowned.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable. And I guess, do you have any priority Red Sox, and are they different at all on FanDuel versus DraftKings?
Yeah, so I mean, just as a whole, for the Red Sox guys, I think if possible, I mean, I know the upside is certainly there for them, but given what the ownership is, I think this is a team. If you're playing, 150 lineups, then get exposure to the Red Sox, be significantly underweight to the field. However, on DraftKings, they become, a pretty high priority because they're going a little bit underowned. So I know that could sound a little confusing, because I think a lot of people build their DFS lineups just based on like, hey, these are the guys I think are going to do well, which in general is kind of how I play, NBA DFS. But baseball is so much different because there's so much variance, and I'm generally playing the ownership game. So I don't think that we could look at it the same across multiple sports. And I don't think the outcome that we think is most likely to happen is as important as what is the outcome relative to the odds that the field is actually rostering them. So talking about individual hitters from Boston, at least from a DraftKings perspective, Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers, super expensive. That's also driving their ownership down a little bit, but there are also cheaper bats that are going to be in the Boston order that make the lineup a little bit more stackable. Kike Hernandez leading off only 4,100. Alex Verdugo, he's hit fairly well this year. He's at 4,400. So you have to mix in some of those cheaper bats to make the more expensive bats viable.
Yeah, I think Marwin Gonzalez, Bobby Dalbec guys projecting the 7 and 8 hole, I think stand out as being not terrible plays. Marwin too benefits from being able to hit from the lefty side of the plate. That's been a really bad for Justin Dunn. 7.8 xFIP, as I mentioned, giving up a 243 ISO to lefties. So I wouldn't hate mixing those guys in to get the ownership down as well as getting the price down of the overall stack. But clearly this is going to be one where you're going to want most of the guys up top, the Verdugos, the Martinezes, the Bogarts, and the Deverses of the world. If you are paying up for the Boston stack, because that's why you want the Boston stack, is the quality hitters who have the track record up there. We got a couple nice chats here to hit on real fast. Later in the show, we're going to do the Awesemo Hall of Fame segment, but I just want to give a shout out to Chad Phillips saying, listen to you guys for 2 days and finished 60th day one. It got my first place finish in an MLB GPP yesterday. Keep it coming. So that's one nice cosign. And Teddy T, also first year playing MLB DFS. These guys have done nothing but build my bankroll so far. So we appreciate that a bunch. Teddy, one of the guys who signed up to the channel, but always nice to hear for MLB because I know a lot of competition going on for views and just people's money right now with the NBA season still going on, PGA still going, MMA. So we appreciate you guys hanging out for MLB and getting some success. And stay tuned for the Hall of Fame segment that we are now being forced to do on every show. Much like early slate content. The YouTube chat forced us to do early slate content, and then the company forced us to do the Hall of Fame. But no, we're excited to show some winnings for you guys out there. And if you have your own screenshots of you winning a tournament, send it to @Awesemo HOF because you can win yourself a free month of Awesemo Plus if you have an Awesemo avatar too. So keep that in mind. Let's keep going through here. Unless, Greg, you have anybody else you wanted to touch on here in this game.
No, if anybody's questions on what I just said, I know it's still kind of the start of the season. I kind of talk about some of the same strategies kind of over and over again. But also, I mean, like we just said in the chat, there's some people who are newer to MLB DFS, and it's something that takes on, to me, a way different strategy than other DFS sports where, football, basketball, a lot of times just rostering the best players more often than not. But if people have questions, just put them in the YouTube chat and I'll answer them because I'm never always sure if when I'm explaining the strategy of things, if it's coming across as clear to people. So ownership to me, very, very important in MLB DFS, more so than who I actually think is going to succeed.
The lineup, the construction of everything, the stacking, all those things that they talk about a lot in the premium game plan videos every day. Definitely something to keep in mind here. And we try to imbue these shows as much of that as possible to help you guys out, but it can be complicated. So definitely never be afraid to ask questions. Next game up, we got the Mets, 4.7 implied runs against Trevor Williams. That I think people are buying into Trevor Williams a little bit more than I would. People thinking that just being on a new team is going to make him a new man. And granted, he has had some better results, but numbers to me, Greg, I feel like for Trevor Williams, I'm not willing to get there. The projection looks pretty bad from Awesemo at his price point. I think Trevor Williams strikeout stuff going back to 2019, only an 18% K rate. And I know it's up a little bit over the shorter term sample size since last season, up to a 20% K rate, just under that, but he gives up a lot of power. I think Trevor Williams, another guy to me that he's not as onerously owned as a guy like Pavetta may seem, but still going to pick up more ownership than I would like, where I don't know that I'd want a lot of Trevor Williams on the slate. I know he's going against a Mets team that does strike out a lot. It's also going to be pretty highly owned and I guess a bit over-owned according to the top stacks tool. But Trevor Williams, the one thing he has going for him is that the Mets have 6 guys that strike out above league average. I just don't have the confidence that he's going to be able to get anything done against them.
So we've talked about this a little bit over the last couple of days. Trevor Williams has spent his entire career to this point with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He's left the Pittsburgh Pirates and he's made tangible changes to his pitch mix this year. And given that we've seen this story written over and over again with pitchers that leave the Pirates, I think there is reason to think that Trevor Williams could be more successful this season. The strikeout rate is a little bit up so far this year. He has gotten lucky in terms of that he's allowed 0 home runs so far. He's gotten unlucky in the fact that he's a 5.02 ERA, but he has a 3.94 expected ERA, 3.16 FIP. I was just looking through his pitch mix numbers and bringing it up here. All right, so here's the biggest difference with him so far this year. He used to use a changeup fairly heavily when he was with the Pirates. He's not anymore. He's only throwing a changeup 7.5% of the time. He has a cutter that a curveball that he's now throwing 12.3% of the time, something that didn't even exist in his repertoire 2 years ago. So the fact that he's going to a curveball more as an off-speed pitch as opposed to a changeup, I think that is something that makes me think like, okay, strikeout numbers a little up for Trevor Williams. His ground ball rate is way up so far to start the year. There's something I could point to that would actually make me think that he's made changes that are something going forward that could make him into a better starting pitcher. So then I go to our top pitcher tool, and I see Trevor Williams right now only going 13% owned, but with a 22% chance of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. I think given the ownership going to guys like Joey Lucchesi, Nick Pivetta, those guys being way overowned, I like Trevor Williams as somebody's going a little bit underowned. If he's going to stick at only 13%, 13% ownership, I think the fact that he has a 20+% chance of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate, that seems about right to me. So I think he's somebody to be overweight too.
Okay, I get that's a reasonable take to have. I think the one thing that jumped out to me is that he's always had a decent swinging strike rate, a 10.5% rate going back to 2019, a 33% chase rate, but he still gets hit hard. So it's, to me, it's not like he hasn't had the ability to make people swing and miss here. Like, those numbers are, I think, normally in line with the pitcher who just gets better results than what Trevor Williams has. So, it's something to watch here. I'm a little bit more reluctant to buy in on guys suddenly changing things meaningfully, unless, it is a Musgrove situation where you're going from a pitcher who had a lot of signs there that was good, and then all the other things up tip along with the strikeout numbers. Trevor Williams, to me, I think everything has been sort of the same, besides the fact that he's getting a little more strikeouts. So I think it regresses, but I get your point. The top pitcher tool is meant to sort of highlight these guys. So by that logic, I will walk back my thoughts a little bit, but I just 8,500 on DK. I do not like that price point for Trevor Williams. The Mets, though, I think an intriguing team here, going to have one of the best chances of being a top stack, Greg, but they are a little bit overowned. The thing, though, with me is that this Mets team, high implied run total. I presume the wind must be blowing out at Wrigley today, right? Because these totals seem very high. Let me just pull that up real fast. But 4.7 implied run total for the Mets. Lots of guys who hit well. He had 9 miles per hour wind going out, so not the craziest, but going out to right field. I just like this Mets team a lot. I feel like you could point to these guys here. Look at the aggregate ISO for the lineup, a 202 ISO. They do strike out a little bit, so maybe that is where the Trevor Williams part comes in and has some upside. A 27% aggregate K rate. 6 guys who strike out above league average. But this Mets stack, to me, Greg, I feel like the one way that you can nickel and dime them is just that they're going to be substantially overowned, or at least decently overowned on DraftKings.
Yeah, and DraftKings, they're only moderately overowned. On Fanduel, like the Red Sox, way overowned. So the Red Sox and the Mets are by far the 2 most popular teams on Fanduel, to the point where we said before the Red Sox have a negative 6.3% leverage, and the Mets are going overowned by 4.4%. Team, they have 14% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but 18.5% ownership share. So the Mets and the Red Sox, 2 teams that I think are going overowned on FanDuel. And definitely, I think the easiest way to differentiate is just stacking pretty much anybody else. Like, all the other teams almost are positively leveraged on FanDuel just because these 2 teams are going so overowned. DraftKings, I think they're a little bit more viable of a target, although once again, also going a little bit overowned. So if I'm going to go up to one of the popular stacks on DraftKings, I'm more apt to get to the Red Sox than I am to the Mets. The Mets are a team that I'm going to be underweight to the field on. Individually, the players that I am looking to target on the Mets as one-offs are going to be some of the left-handed bats that are going up against Trevor Williams. So Francisco Lindor, who just hit his first homer as a Met, I think that his price is likely to go up from here. So him at 4,700 on DraftKings, I do think that he makes sense as a one-off. Jeff McNeil, 4,200, I think that he makes sense as a one-off. If Brandon Nimmo's in the lineup at 3,700, then I think that he would also be somebody to get to. He's missed time recently with a hip injury. Those are the 3 bats that stand out to them most as one-offs on DK.
Yeah, I'm a little more open, I think, to stacking up different Mets, because the righty splits for Williams are appreciably worse. A 243 ISO to righties compared to a 193 ISO to lefties. And you do have a lot of lefties in here. Obviously, a lefty going to have a good shot of getting production against a righty for the most part. And you have good hitting lefties here as well. Conforto at 245 ISO against righties. McNeil 222 ISO against righties. Like, there's enough pop here where, to me, I think you can maybe get some less ownership on the stack by just including a guy like JD Davis. He's also hitting righties pretty well as a fellow righty, but a 192 ISO for him. I'm more intrigued by the Mets stack. I get the high ownership, but it seems to me that there are a couple guys you could throw in. Dominic Smith going to be less owned in the 3 hole, only 13% on DK. I think there's some ways you can chop it up to get a little bit less ownership for the stack, even though they are highly owned. But I get it, what Greg's doing here, taking some one-offs. So certainly some merits to different approaches here. And this is a guy, Greg, you mentioned earlier, you're getting a lot of Joey Lucchesi, and his numbers over the last season and change are, he didn't pitch last year, right? He's only pitched this year?
I'll bring
pitched
up
briefly last year.
I mean, nobody pitched more than briefly last year.
No, he's only faced 50 batters since 2020. So I presume he had maybe pitched a couple games last year, and then the rest is from this year. His numbers are really bad in the short-term sample size, is why I'm asking.
Yeah, so there was a point in time too where he got called up with the Padres, and he was so he's pitched 5 innings this year, 5 innings last year. If I remember correctly, I think he had a shoulder injury. But but I'm not totally positive on that. But yeah, he only pitched 5 innings last year and 5 innings so far this year. But was formerly one of the, not like a top 10 pitching prospect or anything like that in baseball, but he was like a top 50 guy, and definitely looked like he was at least going to be a middle of the rotation starting pitcher. But then Padres kind of bailed on him. He ended up on the Mets this year, and so far still remains to be seen. He's only pitched 5 innings. One of those outings came out of the bullpen. His velocity number so far actually is up. He has a 91.5 average fastball velocity, was actually the highest of his career. So maybe the time off has done him well. And my initial run did get a bunch of him, except that's also before I kind of account for ownership and everything. I just kind of run the projections as is and see what stacks come out and whatnot, just to see what the optimizer likes. But the ownership here on Joey Lucchesi projected for was like 41.3% ownership on DraftKings. That is much too high. And I definitely think he's somebody to have in the player pool. But also, like I said, with Nick Pivetta, I'm going to be a little bit underweight to the field on him. And then talking about the other side of the game, I think the Cubs make for very, very strong leverage and are one of my favorite stacks on the slate. And I did really well on the late slate yesterday, and it was almost in the exact same situation. Peterson was picking up a ton of ownership for the Mets. The Cubs looked like they were going under-owned. It doesn't mean I expect them to score 16 runs, but just a team that looked like almost the exact same situation, going up against a lefty with some talent who is cheap, but the ownership was just not correct. And I think this is another situation to take advantage of the ownership.
Yeah, Lucchesi, I think so. The short-term sample for him, a 1.9 whip, 370 batting average. That's the 10 innings basically that Greg mentioned that he's pitched. But he has shown an uptick in swinging strike rate in that time period, a 14% swinging strike rate, a 33% chase rate. And the thing that I remember with Lucchesi, at least a couple seasons ago, was that he was showing some improved strikeout ability and had a good run there for a while. He's Joey Lucchesi, so I think he does, kind of have some up and down performances really in his track record. But still, a 3% home run rate going back to 2019, 23% strikeout rate, so about league average for him. I think I'm intrigued by Lucchesi just because he's so cheap. I would take him over Justin Dunn by a pretty decent margin. He's going against a Cubs team that is going to have power, has the wind blowing with them as well, as we just mentioned, but 7 guys who strike out above league average. So I think I'm a little more into the idea of Joey Lucchesi, but the ownership is going to be there very heavy, as Greg mentioned. So to me, a guy probably getting 25% of rather than 40% of, but I think still worth getting some exposure to. The Cubs side, though, Greg, 4.8 implied runs. A lot of guys here with power against lefties. Chris Bryant in particular jumps out at 4,500 at 324 ISO against lefties. He really is a much better hitter versus lefties than versus righties. Obviously, good hitter against both sides, but his splits are pretty egregious, as are Wilson Contreras. Expected to hit the leadoff spot as a catcher, 242 ISO for him. I feel like Contreras, Bryant, Baez to me as a 3-man stack looks really appealing, but the 5-man looks solid too. I guess what would be your priority plays from the Cubs hitters?
Yeah. Once again, this is going to be a lot of the same guys that I was on for last night's slate. So Chris Bryant, I think that he makes for a really strong option. And the other thing also, not only is Lucchesi cheap, the Cubs bats are also pretty cheap. It's like Anthony Rizzo, cheap. Chris Bryant, relatively cheap. Javier Baez, he homered last night. He's relatively cheap. Like, these are guys who, in a decent matchup, we normally see in the high 4K to low 5K range. Not the case on DraftKings for tonight. So, like, pretty reasonably priced also for the kind of upside they have. Like I said, I really like the leverage also. And then even talking about them as a stack on Fanduel as well, they are going pretty underowned on both Fanduel and DraftKings. So I actually think the Cubs are probably going to be the team I prioritize the most as a stack, mostly because of the ownership on Lucchesi and the lower ownership on the Cubs.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right to me. And yeah, I think really the one thing that jumps out to me too is the bottom of the order here is egregiously bad. And I think that to me is what makes me think this 3-man stack is going to be more appealing than a 5-man. Like Jock Peterson can't hit lefties at all. And the bullpen behind him behind Lucchesi for the Mets is not that great, but still decent enough, a 25% K rate that I don't think it gets a lot better for him. Marisnik too, nothing impressive. Hayward, nothing impressive versus lefties. I guess it depends if the Cubs lineup is different from the projected one, but I think to me, Greg, I don't know if you feel differently, but I would prefer the 3-man stacks just because I think the bottom 5 hitters here, obviously including the pitcher too, looks like a pretty bad bottom grouping here of hitters.
I still don't mind the 5-man stacks just because the other thing too is stacks is, so if I'm trying to get leverage off of Lucchesi and I think the Cubs are going to get to him, then I have to assume for the stack to really succeed, Lucchesi isn't pitching deep into the game anyway, right? If Lucchesi pitches 6 decent innings, the chances are the Cubs stack was crap anyway. I'm looking for the Cubs to really beat up on him early, like they did with David Peterson yesterday. Get to the bullpen early. The other thing also is, let me look at some of the innings the Mets got out of their bullpen yesterday. But the Mets bullpen is going to be a little bit winded after yesterday's shellacking. So they got 3 innings out of Peterson. Then they had to go to Gazelman, who's one of their better long relievers. He only got 1 inning. Hildenberger pitched 1 1/3 inning. They had to use Loop. They had to use Miguel Castro. Then they had to go to Luis Guillorme, a position player, to finish out the game for them just because they were totally just out of gas in the bullpen, and they lost 16-4. So I don't think the Mets bullpen is in the best state of affairs, especially not the long guys after what they had to do yesterday. So if the Cubs are able to get Lucchesi out of the game early, I don't really think it matters just because like somebody like Jock Peterson, you said that he doesn't hit lefties well. I don't think it's going to matter if Lucchesi is potentially only able to pitch a few innings and then he's going to face bad relievers.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if they're going to start him, I guess that does give more of a cosign to Peterson not getting the hook, because the reason you would give him a hook is normally if it were a righty pitcher and then a lefty comes in, because Jock's numbers versus lefties are just egregiously bad. A .030 ISO, 32 WRC plus for like, he's just, I mean, granted the Dodgers were not playing him a lot against lefties, but he is just very bad against lefties too. So that's why they weren't playing him. Tony A in the chat, all saying Rizzo hits lefties well. He really doesn't. He gets on base well against lefties, a 380 on base percentage, but only a 155 ISO, 29% hard hit rate, only a 2% home run rate. Those are not great numbers, which to me is part of why I don't mind getting some Rizzo, but that's to me is part of the reason that I prefer the 3-man stack, because I think the Contreras, Bryant, Baez part looks really good, and mixing those guys with a third bat would be my approach. But as Greg mentioned, there are some ways that the bullpen give up production too, and the wind's blowing out. So maybe guys have outlier days. Let's keep going here. We got the Angels and Houston. So guys, hit the like button now. We appreciate it a bunch. About 20 minutes left in the show. 2 more games to hit on, and these 2 games may be a little bit less appealing from a fantasy perspective, but let's get into it. Christian Javier. Price point on Christian Javier is outrageous on DraftKings, 9,600 for him. The strikeout numbers have been there, though. He's shown some improvement over the last season and change. Now it's a 26% K rate. He's at a 32% K rate versus righties compared to 22% versus lefties. So some lefty splits here that are not the best. 2 of 14 ISO also given up to lefties. And Javier facing an Angels lineup with 4 guys who strike out above league average, not the best to me, but Javier at this price point, Greg, the projection looks absolutely terrible from Awesemo. The ownership, though, looks kind of appealing. So are you willing to pay up for Christian Javier on this slate where he's not going to be too owned, and he has shown some strikeout ability, even if he doesn't go that deep into games?
If I'm going for a low-owned pitching option, I slightly prefer Trevor Williams just because he's $1,100 cheaper than Christian Javier on DraftKings. FanDuel, where it's a one-pitcher one-pitcher site, I'd rather just go to Walker Buehler. I think he just makes sense to have in most of your lineups, the pay up option, and just be like, hey, Walker Buehler really saved most upside on the slate, not really mess around with too many of the other options. But yeah, so for DraftKings, I'm still going to be prioritizing Walker Buehler. I think it's probably going to be hard to fit Christian Javier and Walker Buehler into the same lineup. So even though Javier has really low ownership, I'm not sure I'm going to easily be able to fit him into the lineup builds I want to make.
Yeah, I think it's a steep price for Javier. I think the one thing that you could sort of just try to talk me into here is he's going to have one of the better strikeout rates on the slate, and that is why you're paying the premium price tag, and it's a tough spot to get it. We know the Angels they have a lot of guys who can extend at bats, and guys at the top of the order too, like David Fletcher doesn't strike out a lot, of 12% K rate, so he's going to eat up some pitches probably from Javier up top. I would play some Javier. I think at least being with the field on 13% for Javier seems right to me, but it is a very low projection from Awesemo, so probably not a guy you're going to even have popping up on an optimizer too often, I would think. The Angels side, though, Greg, I feel like going against Javier, I don't mind it either for them. The ownership going to be a little bit lower than their chances of being a top stack, so that seems fine. And Javier does give up some, as I mentioned, lefty splits. That 214 ISO to lefty is a 188 ISO overall. The Angels don't look terribly appealing, but I feel like getting them as a stack just on this size of a slate, I feel like seems like a move you should make just because they're not going to be overowned.
Yeah, so where I think they are preferable is on FanDuel, just because the players are a little bit cheaper than they are on DraftKings. The other thing also is if you look at the ownership on FanDuel with the Red Sox and the Mets picking up so much of the ownership, the Angels are going pretty under-owned. The 2 teams that are going the most heavily under-owned on FanDuel to me are the Angels and the Cubs. The Angels have a 10.4% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate with only 8.3% ownership share. So not as crazy as the Cubs, which have a 5.5% positive leverage, but still the Angels For a team with offensive talent that's also 2.1% under-owned based on the top stacks tool, the Angels are definitely a team to get to on Fanduel. And then on DraftKings, also going a little bit under-owned, 11% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate and 10% ownership. Also, the Angels have a 14.5% chance of being the top overall value team on the slate, which is the third best mark overall. So the Angels are a team I have interest in on both slates. Both sites. So Christian Javier is one of the better pitchers relative to the other talent we have available to us, but that's not really saying much. That's more because the pitchers kind of suck today.
So for the Angels, I guess to talk about the primary hitters, obviously Mike Trout always going to be in play in every situation. I know Greg also a very big Shohei Ohtani guy. His price now on DraftKings starting to get up to where I think Greg feels like he deserves to be at. I know this has been one of Greg's causes here is just trying to play Ohtani when he was cheap, and I guess really rallying for him to be more expensive and respect of his name, and that is going to be the case today on DraftKings over 5K. Jared Walsh a little bit cheaper, and you do have Justin Upton at 3,300 in this grouping here as a guy who hits righties pretty well, not as good obviously as an Ohtani or a Trout or even a Jared Walsh, but still competent at that price point for a guy hitting cleanup. Do any Angels jump out meaningfully for you here besides the guys that we talked about, or I guess amongst the guys that I just talked about, do any of them seem like a particularly good one-off play?
I mean, Mike Trout's obvious. If you have the salary to get to him, he's the best player in baseball, best hitter in baseball. If you have the salary, pay up for Trout. No issues with that. Justin Upton, to me, going a little bit underpriced on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Upton's always been a big power hitter. He's been really inconsistent over the last few years, but off to a good start this year. He's homered in 3 of the last 4 games. So with the price points still down for Justin Upton, and actually he's at 3,300 today. He was at 3,700 yesterday. And so even after homering, he's gone down by 400. So Justin Upton, I think, is a little bit underpriced, and the power upside's still there for him. So he's actually the Angels hitter that, other than Mike Trout, I have the most exposure to right now.
And then anybody down the order who stands out meaningfully to you? Because I do like including down the order guys sometimes. We've talked about a few occasions on this show just to try to decrease the ownership of the stack. And the stack is underowned anyway, so maybe you don't have to get there. But a Pujols, an Iglesias, a Kurt Suzuki, any of these guys stand out meaningfully. I feel like Suzuki has the catcher option included with the stack. Never opposed to just the correlated catcher play for the stacks on DraftKings, but I feel like Suzuki, particularly adept guy in terms of just not getting strikeouts, and sometimes having some power upside, though, that has started to trickle down a little bit as he's getting a bit older. But Suzuki, I think, would be the one that I'd prioritize. But Pujols, it's 2,700. That is a cheap price point for a hitter who does not have much left in the tank.
So, I mean, Suzuki did homer yesterday. I have him in 12% of my lineups in my initial build. So if I'm going down the order, he's the guy that I have the most exposure to right now. But it's not as much a vote of confidence in him individually as much as outside of Will Smith and Wilson Contreras, there's not really any catcher that I really have all that much confidence in. So there's just a bunch of guys kind of in this low 3K price range on DraftKings who it's like, hey, I have you guys like 8 to 10%, and I hope one of them has a decent game. But most likely all of them are going to suck. Catcher's just a really hard position to fill. So it's not a vote of confidence for Kurt Suzuki other than he's just in a barrel with a bunch of guys that look really similar.
Okay, that's a reasonable way to look at it. Alex Cobb, I'm going to be pitching on the other side for the Angels, another guy with a very poor projection from Awesemo, under 10 fantasy points is the projection there. He's going against a Houston lineup with 5 guys that strike out above league average, but a team that's getting healthier, Yordan Alvarez being back in, going to be an important part of things. And Cobb, to me, the numbers just jump out as exceedingly poor, and he's shown some signs of life over the last year where the home run rate for him since 2019, 5.4%, that's trickled down to 3.3% over the last season and change. The strikeout rate has come up a little bit from 18.8% to 20%. The xFIP, I guess his xFIP has always been good, so maybe he has been a bit more unlucky than it would seem, but 257 ISO given up to righties since 2019 and 194 ISO to lefties. Not great splits for Alex Cobb, Greg. So I guess let's ask the question about him as a pitcher first. Is he a guy you're willing to get to at a price point that is higher than some of the other guys we've talked about and kind of already said you're willing to play as, I guess, dart throw plays that aren't very owned?
Yeah, not on. I mean, FanDuel is all the way up to 8,700, so no reason to consider him there. But on DraftKings, it's 7,700. I mean, he's 4% owned. Nick Pavetta's 43% owned. I don't think Cobb's good. I don't think Pavetta's good. But I don't think Pavetta is like significantly better than Alex Cobb. He does have a better matchup today, but not to the point where I think Nick Pavetta is 10 times more likely to land on the optimal lineup than Alex Cobb is. So Alex Cobb is somebody who's going to be in my GPP player pool, and I'm going to be overweight to the field on him. Something else to consider about the Astros is even though they do have, some guys coming back from COVID now, this is still, a fairly compromised lineup. There's no Jose Altuve in there. They've really struggled after a strong start to the year. I think they won like 6 of the first 7 games, and they've lost a bunch of games in a row since then. They didn't even really hit when they went to Coors Field. So, I mean, if they weren't able to hit bad pitchers at Coors Field, like I think Alex Cobb could have some success against the Astros, and you consider the low ownership on him, and then also the overall outlook of the slate. I think that Alex Cobb is a GPP pitcher to get, maybe like 2-3x the field on.
Yeah, on a slate where everybody, I think we've talked about the pitchers here, and I'm particularly unimpressed with the slate. I do think you make the case for Cobb here a little bit because there are some strikeouts in the lineup. Houston does appear to be overowned according to the top stacks tool. So there are some things going their way, but you're getting a lot of dudes who just get on base and create runs. A 124 aggregate WRC plus for this lineup is pretty scary. So Cobb certainly going to be a volatile pitcher, but I think on this slate, one you can justify getting some exposure to because he's one of few pitchers under 5% ownership, but that projection not going to happen naturally for you on a fantasy country, most likely. The Houston stack, if you're going that way, though, Greg, does look like a lot of ownership going to Yordan Alvarez, to Alex Bregman, guys who have hit righties very well. Alvarez in particular, we know the splits there, but 330 ISO for him against righties, so 7% home run rate. He has been an absolute masher. He'll be very highly owned today. But Miles Straw, pretty unowned on DraftKings. Brantley, pretty unowned on top on DraftKings as well. I feel like those guys, to me, fairly appealing. Carlos Correa, I think, also not the worst play, though the price tag there not appealing. But Straw's a value play. I'm surprised 2,500 on DraftKings in the leadoff spot. He's not a power guy, but he does have some speed, and he is going to be mostly unknown for a guy who's that cheap in a leadoff situation.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if Straw's going to play today. He missed yesterday's game with an illness. Apparently, he got sick when he got his second COVID vaccine. So the Astros had a weird situation where a bunch of players on their team got COVID, and then the rest of the team was like, all right, we're going to go get vaccinated. And then they had a handful of guys like Lance McCullers apparently got an injection on his pitching arm and then pitched that night and was terrible. And like that seemed like a suboptimal strategy to go about. But
one thing they tell you, like when you get the shot, is like, oh, it's going to hurt your muscle here. Like I can't believe that the Astros really have gone a long way from having coordinated cheating efforts to not knowing to not get a shot in your pitching arm.
But yeah, apparently that was what happened the other day. Like he got his vaccination. Apparently he was not like doing well in warmups, but he insisted on pitching, and then he just absolutely sucked that night. And apparently that's what the issue was. But anyway, to Miles Straw, he's had some side effects from getting his second vaccination, so I'm not sure he's going to play. The important point here is we could get our guy, Chas McCormick, could be back in the lineup leading off after he was very unsuccessful in the role yesterday, but he's still cheap on both sides. He could be leading off again. If that's the case, I think he's a good value play. If Straw does end up leading off and playing, then I would assume he's fine. He would make for a good value option. But as a one-off, I still like Yordan Alvarez a lot. He's only 4,500 on DraftKings, 3,400 on Fanduel. Probably the most likely player on the slate to homer outside of Mike Trout. I don't want to tease my home run pick too much, but I think he's somebody who really stands out as potential for hitting a homer tonight. So Yordan Alvarez is a really strong one-off play.
Yordan Alvarez does seem worth the chalky ownership he'll have as a one-off. And going down the order, any guys who stand out to you? I feel like Kyle Tucker, to me, at 14% ownership, he does have enough pop to, have the upside, I guess, to break a slate or at least be a meaningful addition to a winning lineup. I think he's really the one that jumps out to me with the price tag and the home run upside he has. But any of the down-to-order Astros really jumping out to you?
No, I'm underweight to the field on the Astros for the most part. Like I have Alvarez a lot as a one-off, but I mean, looking at our top stacks, so this is a team that looks like they're going over-owned on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So not a team that I'm especially interested in.
All right, let's speed it up here because I'm making us make bad time. We got 2 games left. So hit that like button, guys. We got one more here. Miami, 3.8 implied runs against Aaron Sanchez. San Francisco, 4.7 implied runs going against Daniel Castano. And worth pointing out, a conversation we've had about the Giants' home park recently is that they have over the last season allowed a little bit more power. So let that color what you're seeing here a little bit more. And going against Aaron Sanchez, he is a guy who, for the most part, not giving up a lot of fly balls, only a 30% fly ball rate going back to 2019, 27% over the last season and change. Not a lot of strikeouts for Aaron Sanchez, but he is facing a Miami lineup that doesn't have a ton of pop. It also has 5 guys that strike out above league average. So, Greg, how are you feeling about Aaron Sanchez as another paydown option, but one that is also going to be chalky on the slate of just mediocre pitchers being chalky?
So Aaron Sanchez is somebody, let's see, what was he, 7,100 on DraftKings. I kind of he was once a really, really well-regarded pitching prospect, and it didn't really work out. But then he got traded to the Astros, and we've seen the Astros recreate so many pitchers, whether it be by cheating or whatever else it goes on. Like, I thought that Aaron Sanchez was going to be one of those guys who the Astros, because he still has good stuff, we're going to be able to turn him into a viable major league starting pitcher, and they just weren't really able to do it. So Aaron Sanchez, to me, if you have him in your player pool, fine. I don't have an issue with it. But I mean, he's 7% more roster than Alex Cobb. And to me, I don't view them as significantly different pitching options. If I'm going for one of the chalkier, cheap starting pitchers, I'd still rather go to Lucchesi or Pivetta for Aaron Sanchez. So not really a priority for me. Also, the Giants offense, actually both these offenses, neither of them have been like as bad as would have been expected coming into the season.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable too. Miami does have at least a few hitters to worry about. Adam Duvall, a guy we've talked about recently, all he does is have power. Jazz Chisholm has shown a little bit of power and not a great batting average so far, but I think enough signs here that he's going to show some signs of life. The Miami stack, though, does appear to be a bit overowned according to the top stacks tool, though they do have a pretty high chance of being the top value stack on the day, Greg, with about double the chance of their opportunity to be the top value stack compared to their ownership. How are you feeling about Miami here? Are they an option you're getting to as a stack just because of the value they represent, or there's really not anything you're paying up for in the slate? So I don't know that you have to get there, I guess, besides Walker Buehler.
Yeah, I think where they make sense is so if you want to make lineups with Christian Javier and Walker Buehler, I think the Marlins make sense there. Like you said, I mean, 17.5% chance on DraftKings being the top value stock on the slate. So you could really stack the Marlins with any three pay up options you want and the two most expensive starting pitchers just because of their cheap price. And I think that's a viable lineup build for the slate. And then on FanDuel also, they're actually going under-owned on FanDuel with only 5% ownership and an 8% chance being a top stack. So the Marlins actually are a team I have interest in stacking both FanDuel and DraftKings.
Yeah, I think the value thing there is a big one where we talk a lot about the top stack opportunity or chances relative to the ownership. Top value stack is an important part too. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a ton of scoring upside, but if they open up a lineup construction that works, like maybe using the Miami gets you to a Boston stack more easily if as the full stack or a 3-man. Like there's a lot of reasons to have utility for Miami, and their value opportunity seems pretty high, and the park factors could be better than it seems. So even though Sanchez keeps the ball down for the most part, I agree. Miami, not a great run total, but worth getting some exposure to. Daniel Castano on the other side, low price point for him, low projection for him. He has been looking at the numbers, kind of baffling, very high, not a very high home run rate, but also an 8% K rate for him. Has only pitched last season and changed and hasn't faced a ton of batters, only 145 batters faced, but not getting strikeouts at all, not getting guys to swing and miss at all. I do like the Giants a lot as the team here going against him. I don't see any reason to play Castano, but do you feel any differently about him at a low price point?
No, I like the Giants offense has been crushing lately. There is a sneaky amount of power in this lineup. They're going about appropriately owned. So I do think this is a team to get to. No interest in Castano at all.
All right, your Giants hitters, I do think that some of these guys, really the top five to me, are the ones that jump out. Slater, Yastrzemski, Darren Ruff has also been hitting lefties really well, a 320 ISO for him in a limited sample size. Evan Longoria, I think a much better hitter versus lefties than righties. At this point, his splits are so pronounced. At 245 ISO versus lefties, it gets a lot worse versus righties. Wilmer Flores as well, not bad price tag, dual position eligibility on DraftKings, 290 ISO for him versus lefties. I just think to me the top five looks good. And if you got some of Mauricio Dubon at the bottom, I think he's okay too. But besides that, Greg, what are you prioritizing? Are you with me here? The top five is clearly a cut above the rest of the lineup.
Yeah, I don't think you mentioned Darren Ruff, but he's expected at fifth right now. He's only 3,200. He has a decent amount of power upside. He also homered yesterday. So like I said, I think the Giants' favorable matchup. The ownership's about appropriate. I'm probably going to be somewhere around even with the field on them, but it is a team to get to and stacks on both FanDuel and DraftKings.
I did in fact mention Darren Ruff. How dare you? I've been so early on the Darren Ruff train because his name sounds like a dog noise. That's very important.
He's a good dog for sure. And also Darren Ruff, I was just pointing out one random thing. I know we're going long on time here, but whatever, who cares? So Darren Ruff, he was one of those guys who hit really well in the minor leagues and just had killer minor league numbers and never got called up. And then just got called up as like a 27-year-old rookie and just kind of had sustained success for a little while in the big leagues.
Probably some sustained sacks too, Greg. He's now a professional player, finally. Hope it's going well for him. But yeah, ton of pop for Darren Ruff in his MLB time so far, as I mentioned, versus lefties. 320 ISO overall, 280 ISO. So he has been fitting right in with the rest of these guys who have more pop than I think the general public realizes. So Giants a little bit overowned on the top stacks tool, but I think to me they'd be a priority stack today. Last game on the slate, so hit that like button, guys. We'll do a little Awesemo Hall of Fame too. The close is out after this one, but San Diego 3.2 implied runs against Walker Buehler. Buehler really the premier pay up option here. I think Christian Javier, you could sort of force your way there, but Buehler, the numbers for him, a 28% K rate since 2019, has trickled down over the last season and changed. That's a 25% K rate. But he doesn't give up production. He does mostly limit power. Only, I guess, a 4% on run rate over the last season, but only a 0.97 whip, 4 xFIP. So the numbers look good for him. Buehler's the stud on the slate, Greg. So I guess how are you handling him given that he's so chalky? And looking at the projection from Awesemo, it's not a great projection, but the slate is just so ugly that I feel like you still probably have to get more Buehler than not.
Yeah, he's going to be my most rostered player on the slate. I don't really have too much else to add to this game. Play Walker Buehler, play him in cash games, play him a bunch in tournaments. Very similar to when we talked about, Max Scherzer yesterday, where it was like, hey, the matchup isn't ideal. Maybe there are some red flags here, but like, who else are we going to at pitcher? So I'm going to be playing a ton of Walker Buehler. Probably is going to end up in like 80 to 90% of my lineups.
Yeah, I think it sort of speaks for itself here. The Padres lineup, though, it definitely poses some risk on their side. Buehler gives up a lot of steals to lefties, and you do have a couple of lefties who enjoy getting stolen bases up top. Trent Grisham and Cronenworth, too, to a lesser extent, but those guys not the most prolific base stealers, but still guys who I think could pose some threats there. And it does seem like the Padres stack under-owned relative to their chances of being a top stack, though a much lower probability of getting there compared to teams like the Mets or Boston, who we hit on earlier. So how are you handling this Padres stack, and do you see yourself getting any, Greg?
Not a team I have interest in. Walker Buehler is really good, and the Padres are struggling to start the year. And then also the Dodgers have a good bullpen behind Walker Buehler. So even if Buehler struggles with pitch count or whatever, maybe he doesn't have his best outing. It's hard for me to see the Padres really ending up being the top scoring team on the slate. So no real interest in the Padres. Walker Buehler is my focus on this game and for the slate as a whole.
And our last pitcher on the slate, Ryan Weathers, who's not pitched too deep into games. And I guess that's why his numbers look so good so far. He's only faced 34 batters in the majors, but a 29% K rate. The swinging strike rate and chase rate would seem to indicate that's going to come down a bit, but also a 0.72 whip. So good numbers for Weathers. I don't think he can pitch that deep here. I guess I might be willing to take the flyer just on the slate. Some of the guys that we talked about, he's 7,300 on DK. It's not a good spot going against the Dodgers, but only 4.3 implied runs. I don't hate the idea of taking some flyers on Ryan Weathers. Do you feel any differently? Are you playing any of him at all?
I just assume he's going to be an opener who pitches like 2 innings or something like that in this game. Really tough matchup against the Dodgers also. But then on the flip side, Weathers, I think, should be able to pitch well enough in his couple innings. And then it's just going to be a bullpen game where a bunch of guys are pitching, like 1 to 2 innings at a time that will probably be able to limit the overall production of the Dodgers. There's also a risk of the Dodgers going out and pinch hitting a lot of guys because that's something they do fairly often. There's going to be a lot of pitchers coming in and out. So Dodgers not a priority for me. Weathers, no interest in, and I'm not going to be rostering any of the relievers behind him either.
Okay. I wouldn't mind playing Weathers just because he is the exact same price point as Pivetta. And if Pivetta somehow ends up in the negatives or just has a very bad day and Weathers finds a few strikeouts here, I think he can be useful, but not a priority play at all. Under 1% ownership expected. So if you are getting him, it's just a sprinkling. And the Dodgers, as well as Greg mentioned, not the most appealing team, though they do have a better chance of being the top stack today relative to their ownership. So that is rare for the Dodgers. So maybe a day to get a little bit more Dodgers, but not as much as usual. And I guess, Chris, if you could cue up the Awesemo Hall of Fame, let's do that part. Now we can close out the show. I hear music. I hear Hall of Fame. I hear epic Hall of Fame music. Let me pull this up. So the Awesemo Hall of Fame, for you guys out there, if you want to be a part of the Hall of Fame, it's so illustrious, so prestigious. How could you not want to be a part of it? Download the Awesemo profile pic at awesemo.com/avatar. Tweet your wins at AwesemoHOF, and then win yourself a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum if you finish, I think, in the top 5,000 of a big tournament or something. No, not in the top 5,000. You finish in the top 3 in the top out of 5,000. I don't know. Greg, do you know what the rules are? Would have been helpful to know. That's it. Top 3 in a 5,000 or more person GP. Thank you, Chris. I was so close. It's upsetting when you're so close, especially, again, with the prestige of the Hall of Fame here. You can see some of these shots on the screen. Shout out to, oh boy, these names are small. Gerald Lee Davis. Thanks for all the DFS insight every day, Awesemo team. Excited to try Platinum for a month. He finished 3rd there, 5K takedown in the world of PGA. We got Craig Williamson here, another Hall of Fame member. How could you forget about Craig Williamson that day? His induction speech in the Hall of Fame, just simply beautiful here. $350 win for him, and it's achievable. That's really the thing for you guys. It's not all $50,000 wins. It's just somebody playing the dribbler and having a nice result there with his first place takedown. We also got Al, and his handle is Al Gets It Done, and Al seemingly did, in fact, get it done. A second place finish there, and he didn't even fucking tag me. He says, shout out to Spags. Tag at Chris Spags if I had a good call, and granted, I have so many of them, it's hard to keep track, but this was, I guess, last weekend, and this guy, old Al, couldn't get it done in tagging Spags, but got it done with a win here, 3K. We also got, who is this? We got,
I can't read that. That is too blurry for me. My contacts are bothering me as is. I can't see anything.
Well, we got two guys there who. Yeah, so so JRS won 15K, and then you got CZAP too at 50K, so he's not even in the Hall of Fame segment, but there he is with that Awesemo avatar, so another illustrious member of the Hall of Fame, JRS 7881 on the NBA shot. And then we have Steve Buzzard, who is an employee here who does a lot of stuff behind the scenes, including the game plan videos. I believe he's actually in the premium Slack right now doing office hours, and the Colts always just crushing everything here, 87,000 in that one, or 67,000, 9,000 in the second lineup, so lots of people here in the Hall of Fame. I feel like you shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame if you're an employee. I know they should be featured in the segment, but I'm gonna nickel and dime Steve Buzzard's Hall of Fame candidacy here, because you can't be voting for the Hall of Fame and in the Hall of Fame. Though I guess isn't that actually how every Hall of Fame works? I might have roped myself into it.
Yeah, and the other thing also, what bugs me about that screenshot is that I'm like the next lineup right behind Steve, and I got screwed by a bad decision in UFC on that night.
Yeah, lots of Hall of Fame worthy lineups out there. So again, go to awesemo.com/avatar, tweet at Awesemo HOF with your wins, and you can win that free week of Awesemo Plus if you finish in the top 3 in a 5,000 person or more tournament, not in the top 5,000 in a 3-person tournament. That would really throw you for a loop. Greg, give the people your final plug for the day. What other shows do you have coming up, and where can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Ehrenberg Dfs. I'll be doing the NBA Live Before Lock show with my friend and yours, Eric Lindquist, tonight. So stay tuned for that as well.
Yeah, make sure to tune in to me and Greg coming up later today. I'm going to have a lot of fun. And make sure to watch MLB Live Before Lock with Alex, Terry, and Gundacker at 3 p.m. Eastern today. Watch me on the tip-off at some time. And last 2 days of the Four Corners, because I'm being shifted over to the Live Before Lock world for MLB to help add some value to guess what those guys are doing over there. So enjoy the final Four Corners videos coming up tomorrow and Friday before it goes on another hiatus. This is not what I am, just a creative type who makes content and then disappears from it like an artist. But follow at Chris Spags, follow at Ehrenberg Dfs, follow at Awesemo_com, and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see all the content we have going all day long. We appreciate you guys for watching. Catch you guys again soon. Enjoy your days. Good luck.